Question 1. System analysis indicates that a marketing team requires access to detailed customer purchase history data to identify trends for an upcoming product launch. The data contains personally identifiable information. The team needs to analyze purchasing patterns, product preferences, and demographic correlations to inform their strategy. What is the most appropriate method to enable this analysis while adhering to data privacy principles? Option A. Anonymize the customer data by removing all purchase details and demographic information, leaving only a generic dataset of transactions. Option B. Provide the marketing team with direct access to the raw, identifiable customer purchase history data, with a verbal assurance that they will handle it confidentially. Option C. Implement a strict access control policy that allows only senior management to view the raw customer data and have them manually summarize insights for the marketing team. Option D. Anonymize the customer data by removing direct identifiers and aggregating it to a level where individuals cannot be reasonably re-identified, ensuring the remaining data is still useful for trend analysis. Correct answer is D. Anonymize the customer data by removing direct identifiers and aggregating it to a level where individuals cannot be reasonably re-identified, ensuring the remaining data is still useful for trend analysis. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for efficient data processing with the imperative to protect sensitive customer information, a core tenet of data privacy regulations. The pressure to deliver timely insights for a new product launch, coupled with the potential for data breaches, requires a nuanced approach that prioritizes security without unduly hindering business objectives. The complexity arises from identifying the appropriate level of anonymization and ensuring its effectiveness against sophisticated re-identification techniques. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by adhering to the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, fundamental to data protection laws. By anonymizing the data to a degree that prevents the identification of individuals while still retaining its analytical value, it fulfills the regulatory requirement to protect personal data. This approach ensures that the data used for market research is no longer considered personal data, thereby mitigating the risk of breaches and noncompliance. It reflects a proactive stance on data privacy, aligning with the spirit and letter of data protection frameworks. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves using the raw, identifiable customer data directly for analysis. This is a direct violation of data privacy regulation, which mandate the protection of personal information. It exposes the company to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust due to potential data breaches. Another incorrect approach is to anonymize the data to such an extent that it becomes analytically useless. While this might seem like an overabundance of caution, it fails to meet the business objective of gaining actionable insights for the new product launch. It also represents a failure to apply data protection principles proportionately, potentially leading to inefficient resource allocation and missed business opportunities, which can indirectly impact compliance by creating pressure to circumvent proper procedures later. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on a general statement of confidentiality without implementing specific technical or organizational measures for data protection. This is insufficient under most data privacy frameworks, which require demonstrable safeguards. A mere promise of confidentiality is not a substitute for robust anonymization or pseudonymization techniques and secure data handling protocols. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should employ a risk-based approach. This involves understanding the sensitivity of the data, the potential impact of a breach, and the specific requirements of applicable data protection laws. The decision-making process should prioritize data minimization and the application of appropriate security measures, such as anonymization or pseudonymization, to reduce risks to an acceptable level. Collaboration between data protection officers, IT security, and the business units is crucial to ensure that both compliance and business objectives are met effectively and ethically. Question 2. Implementation of a secure and compliant system for storing and accessing candidate assessment data for the Honda hiring assessment test requires careful consideration of data protection principles. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements and professional ethics for managing this sensitive information? Option A. storing candidate assessment data in encrypted cloud storage with granular access controls, allowing only authorized HR personnel to access it for specific recruitment purposes. Option B, storing candidate assessment data on a shared, unencrypted network drive accessible to all employees. Option C, forwarding candidate assessment data via unencrypted email to multiple internal stakeholders without a clear need-to-know basis. Option D, saving candidate assessment data in a publicly accessible cloud storage folder, even if password protected. The correct answer is A, storing candidate assessment data in encrypted cloud storage with granular access controls, allowing only authorized HR personnel to access it for specific recruitment purposes. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in regulatory compliance, balancing the need for efficient business operations with the stringent requirements of data privacy regulations. The professional challenge lies in interpreting and applying the Honda hiring assessment test's specific regulatory framework, which likely emphasizes data protection and candidate rights, to a practical situation involving the storage and access of sensitive personal information. Misinterpreting these requirements can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of trust with potential employees. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions taken are compliant, ethical, and uphold the integrity of the hiring process. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves implementing a secure, access-controlled system for storing candidate assessment data that aligns with the Honda hiring assessment test's regulatory framework. This typically means adhering to principles of data minimization, purpose limitation, and robust security measures. Storing data in encrypted cloud storage with granular access controls, where only authorized HR personnel can access it for specific recruitment purposes, demonstrates a commitment to data protection. This approach ensures that candidate information is handled responsibly, in compliance with relevant privacy laws, as defined by the Honda hiring assessment test's jurisdiction, and minimizes the risk of unauthorized disclosure or misuse. It upholds the ethical obligation to protect candidate data and builds confidence in the fairness and security of the hiring process. Incorrect approach is analysis. Storing candidate assessment data on a shared, unencrypted network drive accessible to all employees, regardless of their role in the hiring process, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach violates principles of data security and access control, exposing sensitive personal information to a broad audience and increasing the risk of breaches or misuse. It fails to comply with likely data protection mandates that require safeguarding personal data. Saving candidate assessment data in a publicly accessible cloud storage folder, even if password protected, is also professionally unacceptable. Public accessibility, even with a password, fundamentally undermines the principle of confidentiality and controlled access. It creates an unnecessary and high risk of unauthorized access, violating data privacy regulations and ethical standards regarding the handling of personal information. Forwarding candidate assessment data via unencrypted email to multiple internal stakeholders without a clear need-to-know basis is another regulatory and ethical lapse. Email is inherently insecure for transmitting sensitive data, and broad distribution increases the likelihood of data falling into the wrong hands. This approach disregards the need for secure data transfer and controlled dissemination, directly contravening likely data protection requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a risk-based approach to data management. First, identify the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the data being handled, as dictated by the Honda hiring assessment test's jurisdiction. Second, assess the sensitivity of the data and the potential risks associated with its storage, access, and transmission. Third, implement technical and organizational measures that are proportionate to the identified risks and compliant with regulations. This includes utilizing secure storage solutions, enforcing strict access controls, and ensuring data is only shared on a need-to-know basis through secure channels. Regular training on data protection policies and procedures is also crucial. When in doubt, consulting with legal or compliance officers is a best practice. Question 3. Quality control measures reveal a minor deviation in the paint finish of a batch of newly manufactured Honda vehicles, which, while not immediately impacting safety or performance, falls slightly outside the specified aesthetic tolerance. The production line supervisor is aware of this deviation and is under pressure to meet a critical delivery deadline for a major fleet order. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the supervisor to take? Option A. Inform the sales team about the minor paint finish issue and let them decide how to communicate it to the fleet customer. Option B. Immediately report the paint finish deviation to the internal quality assurance and compliance departments for assessment and guidance. Option C. Attempt to discreetly touch up the affected vehicles to meet the aesthetic tolerance before shipment, without formal reporting. Option D. Proceed with the shipment of the vehicles as scheduled, making a note to address the paint finish issue in future production runs. The correct answer is B. Immediately report the paint finish deviation to the internal quality assurance and compliance departments for assessment and guidance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between achieving business objectives, meeting production targets, and adhering to regulatory requirements for product safety and quality. The pressure to meet deadlines can tempt individuals to overlook or minimize compliance steps, which can have severe consequences for the company, including reputational damage, financial penalties, and harm to consumers. Careful judgment is required to balance efficiency with the non-negotiable imperative of regulatory adherence. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes immediate reporting of the quality issue to the relevant internal compliance and quality assurance departments. This aligns with the principles of proactive compliance and risk management mandated by regulatory frameworks such as those governing automotive manufacturing. Prompt reporting ensures that the issue is investigated thoroughly, potential risks are assessed, and corrective actions are implemented before the product reaches consumers. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory responsibility, safeguarding both the company and its customers. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves attempting to rectify the issue internally without formal reporting. This is a regulatory failure because it bypasses established quality control and reporting protocols, potentially leading to inadequate or undocumented fixes. It also conceals a potential noncompliance issue from those responsible for regulatory oversight. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with production while downplaying the severity of the defect. This is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. It demonstrates a disregard for consumer safety and a willingness to violate regulations designed to prevent defective products from entering the market. This can lead to severe legal repercussions and a loss of consumer trust. A third incorrect approach is to delay reporting until a later, more convenient time. This is a failure in risk management and regulatory compliance. Delays can allow the defect to propagate through the production line, increasing the scope of the problem and the potential harm. It also suggests a lack of urgency in addressing issues that could impact public safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should follow a clear decision-making framework. 1. Identify the issue and its potential impact, particularly concerning safety and regulatory compliance. 2. Consult internal policies and procedures related to quality control and issue reporting. 3. Immediately report the issue through the designated channels to the appropriate departments, e.g., quality assurance, compliance, legal. 4. Cooperate fully with investigations and corrective action processes. 5. Prioritize regulatory adherence and consumer safety over short-term production pressures. Question 4. The evaluation methodology shows a scenario where a newly hired compliance officer is asked to implement a new anti-money laundering (AML) reporting procedure. The officer has received a brief overview of the new regulation and the firm's draft procedure document. What is the most appropriate initial step to ensure effective and compliant implementation? Option A. Immediately begin training staff on the draft procedure, assuming it accurately reflects the regulatory requirements. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the new regulation and compare it against the draft procedure to identify any discrepancies or areas needing clarification before proceeding with implementation. Option C. Proceed with implementing the draft procedure as is, focusing on speed to meet internal deadlines and address any potential issues as they arise. Option D. Rely on the informal guidance of a senior colleague who has experience with previous AML reporting procedures to adapt the new one. The correct answer is A. Immediately begin training staff on the draft procedure, assuming it accurately reflects the regulatory requirements. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows a scenario where a new employee is tasked with implementing a compliance procedure. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need for efficiency with the absolute requirement of adhering to regulatory mandates. The employee must demonstrate an understanding of the underlying principles of the regulation, not just the mechanics of its application. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding of the regulatory framework before implementation. This ensures that the procedure is not only followed but also correctly interpreted and applied, minimizing the risk of noncompliance. It demonstrates a commitment to due diligence and a proactive stance in regulatory adherence, which is a cornerstone of ethical conduct and professional responsibility within the financial services industry. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without verifying the accuracy of the interpretation of the regulatory requirements is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to systemic errors in compliance, potentially resulting in significant fines, reputational damage, and legal repercussions for the firm. Another incorrect approach, which relies on informal guidance from a colleague without cross-referencing official documentation, bypasses established procedures for regulatory interpretation and can lead to misapplication of rules. This undermines the integrity of the compliance function and exposes the firm to undue risk. A third incorrect approach, which assumes the existing procedure is sufficient without any review, ignores the dynamic nature of regulations and the potential for outdated or incomplete compliance measures. This demonstrates a lack of critical thinking and a failure to uphold the professional obligation to ensure ongoing compliance. The professional reasoning process for similar situations involves a structured approach. First, thoroughly understand the regulatory requirement. Second, assess the existing procedures against that requirement. Third, identify any gaps or areas for improvement. Fourth, implement changes with proper documentation and verification. And finally, establish a process for ongoing monitoring and review. This systematic approach ensures that compliance is robust, accurate, and sustainable. Question 5. Strategic planning requires a thorough understanding of customer behavior and market trends. When considering how to gather insights for the Honda hiring assessment test strategic development, what is the most compliant and ethically sound method to obtain relevant data? Option A. Directly accessing individual customer purchase histories and personal contact information to identify patterns. Option B. Requesting access to anonymized and aggregated customer feedback data that reflects general trends and preferences. Option C. Conducting informal surveys among employees without a structured methodology or data privacy protocols. Option D. Relying on outdated market research reports that may not reflect current customer sentiment. The correct answer is B. Requesting access to anonymized and aggregated customer feedback data that reflects general trends and preferences. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the strict regulatory requirements for data handling and privacy. The challenge lies in obtaining necessary insights for strategic planning without compromising the confidentiality and integrity of customer data, which is paramount under the Honda hiring assessment tests governing regulations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to the established regulatory framework. By seeking anonymized or aggregated data, the team demonstrates a commitment to data privacy principles and avoids potential breaches of confidentiality. This aligns with the ethical obligation to protect sensitive information and the legal imperative to comply with data protection laws relevant to the Honda hiring assessment test. This method ensures that strategic decisions are informed by insights derived from data in a manner that is both compliant and responsible. An incorrect approach that involves directly accessing individual customer records without explicit consent or a clear, legally defined purpose would constitute a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would violate data privacy regulations, potentially leading to severe penalties, reputational damage, and a loss of customer trust. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on anecdotal evidence or speculation, would fail to meet the standards of data-driven strategic planning and could lead to flawed decision-making, undermining the effectiveness of the assessment test. A third incorrect approach, which involves delaying the strategic planning process indefinitely due to an overestimation of data access hurdles, would be professionally negligent, as it hinders the organization's ability to adapt and improve. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the strategic objective, then assessing the available data and the regulatory constraints surrounding its use. This involves consulting relevant policies and legal guidance, exploring compliant methods for data acquisition and analysis, such as anonymization or aggregation, and seeking expert advice if necessary. The process should always prioritize ethical considerations and regulatory compliance, ensuring that any data-informed strategy is built on a foundation of trust and legality. Question 6. Investigation of a hiring manager's request to bypass standard background check procedures for a candidate, citing a tight deadline and personal recommendation, presents a critical compliance dilemma. The employee responsible for initiating the hiring process is aware that the standard procedure, as outlined in the Honda Hiring Assessment Test's regulatory framework, mandates a comprehensive background check for all candidates regardless of internal recommendations or urgency. Option A. Immediately inform the hiring manager that their request cannot be fulfilled and refuse to proceed with the candidate's application. Option B. Proceed with the background check as per the established policy, documenting the manager's request and the decision to adhere to protocol, and inform the manager of the policy requirement. Option C. Escalate the matter directly to senior leadership without first consulting the compliance department or HR. Option D. Fulfill the hiring manager's request to bypass the background check to meet the deadline and avoid potential conflict. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the background check as per the established policy, documenting the manager's request and the decision to adhere to protocol, and inform the manager of the policy requirement. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an employee to navigate a potential conflict between a direct request from a superior and established company policy designed to ensure regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. The pressure to comply with a supervisor's directive, even if it appears to circumvent established procedures, can be significant. Careful judgment is required to uphold integrity and adherence to the Honda Hiring Assessment Test's regulatory framework without jeopardizing professional relationships. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to the established regulatory framework and internal policies of Honda. Specifically, it involves seeking clarification and guidance from the appropriate compliance or HR department. This action demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance, ensuring that hiring practices are fair, consistent, and meet all legal and company standards. It also provides a documented record of the employee's attempt to resolve the issue appropriately, protecting both the employee and the company. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and risk management, which are implicitly tested in a hiring assessment. An incorrect approach that involves directly fulfilling the supervisor's request without seeking further clarification or adhering to policy is professionally unacceptable. This action would represent a failure to uphold regulatory compliance and ethical standards. It could lead to discriminatory hiring practices, legal repercussions for Honda, and damage to the company's reputation. Such a failure indicates a lack of understanding of the importance of established procedures and a willingness to compromise integrity for expediency. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the supervisor's request and proceed with the hiring process as usual without addressing the discrepancy, is also professionally unacceptable. While it avoids directly violating policy, it fails to address a potential issue raised by a supervisor, which could indicate a misunderstanding or a need for policy clarification. This passive approach does not demonstrate proactive engagement with compliance matters and could lead to missed opportunities for process improvement or the perpetuation of misunderstandings. A further incorrect approach, such as immediately reporting the supervisor to higher authorities without first attempting to resolve the issue through internal channels, might be seen as an overreaction and could damage professional relationships unnecessarily. While escalation is sometimes necessary, it should typically follow an attempt to address the concern through established reporting lines or compliance departments. This approach can be perceived as confrontational rather than collaborative in seeking a compliant solution. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the core issue and its potential implications for regulatory compliance and company policy. 2. Reviewing relevant company policies and the Honda Hiring Assessment Test's guidelines. 3. Seeking clarification from the supervisor to understand their intent and rationale. 4. If the supervisor's request still appears to conflict with policy, consulting with the designated compliance or HR department for guidance and a definitive interpretation. 5. Documenting all communications and actions taken. 6. Acting in accordance with the guidance received from the compliance department. Question 7. The control framework reveals that a proposed process optimization aims to significantly reduce cycle time on the assembly line. However, the proposed change involves streamlining a quality assurance checkpoint that has historically identified minor deviations. What is the most professionally responsible approach to evaluating this optimization? Option A. Reject the proposed optimization outright, prioritizing the existing, albeit less efficient, process to avoid any potential disruption to quality control. Option B. Immediately implement the change to capitalize on the projected cost savings and efficiency gains, assuming that the historical low rate of identified deviations indicates minimal risk. Option C. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to determine if the streamlined checkpoint adequately mitigates potential quality issues, and if the remaining controls are sufficient to meet regulatory and internal quality standards. Option D. Delegate the decision to the production floor supervisor, who has direct operational experience, to determine if the change is feasible without further formal review. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to determine if the streamlined checkpoint adequately mitigates potential quality issues and if the remaining controls are sufficient to meet regulatory and internal quality standards. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in process optimization, balancing efficiency gains with the need for robust internal controls and compliance. The professional challenge lies in identifying improvements that are not only cost-effective, but also adhere to the principles of good governance and regulatory expectations, particularly within the context of a regulated industry like automotive manufacturing, which is subject to stringent quality and safety standards. Careful judgment is required to avoid shortcuts that could compromise product integrity or lead to non-compliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it systematically evaluates potential process changes against established control objectives and regulatory requirements. This involves a thorough risk assessment to understand the potential impact of any optimization on quality, safety, and compliance. By prioritizing changes that maintain or enhance control effectiveness while improving efficiency, it aligns with the principles of responsible business conduct and proactive risk management, which are implicitly expected under general business ethics and potentially specific automotive industry standards for quality management systems, e.g., ISO/TS 16949, now IAT 16949. This approach ensures that efficiency is achieved without sacrificing the integrity of the control framework. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on control effectiveness would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to regulatory failures if the optimized process inadvertently bypasses critical checks or introduces new vulnerabilities that violate quality or safety regulations. For instance, eliminating a quality inspection step to save time might increase the risk of defective parts reaching the market, leading to recalls, customer dissatisfaction, and potential penalties under consumer protection laws or industry-specific quality mandates. Another incorrect approach might involve implementing a new technology without adequate validation or training, which could introduce operational risks and compromise the reliability of the process, potentially violating operational efficiency standards or internal policy. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Define the objective. Clearly articulate the goals of process optimization, including efficiency targets and any constraints. 2. Identify stakeholders. Determine who is affected by the process and involve them in the evaluation. 3. Assess current state. Understand the existing process, its controls, and its performance. 4. Identify potential optimizations. Brainstorm and evaluate various ways to improve the process. 5. Conduct a risk and control impact assessment. For each potential optimization, analyze its impact on existing controls, potential new risks, and compliance with relevant regulations and standards. 6. Prioritize based on a balanced scorecard. Evaluate options not just on efficiency gains, but also on their impact on risk, quality, compliance, and overall business objectives. 7. Implement and monitor. roll out selected optimizations with appropriate controls, and continuously monitor their effectiveness. Question 8. When evaluating a candidate's suitability for a role at Honda and considering the need to gather information for assessment, what is the most appropriate method for handling candidate data in compliance with general principles of regulatory and ethical conduct? Option A. Gather as much personal information as possible about the candidate's background and personal life to build a comprehensive profile, assuming this will provide deeper insights into their potential fit. Option B. Rely on publicly available information and social media profiles to infer aspects of a candidate's personality and work ethic, without directly asking them for this information. Option C. Collect a broad range of data, including sensitive personal details, and store it indefinitely, as it might be useful for future hiring decisions or internal audits. Option D. Collect only the information directly necessary for assessing job-related skills and qualifications. Clearly communicate the purpose of data collection to the candidate, and obtain their explicit consent before proceeding. The correct answer is D. Collect only the information directly necessary for assessing job-related skills and qualifications. Clearly communicate the purpose of data collection to the candidate, and obtain their explicit consent before proceeding. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the complexities of regulatory compliance in a dynamic business environment, specifically within the context of the Honda hiring assessment test's implied jurisdiction, which we will assume for this exercise is a general business context requiring adherence to common ethical and regulatory principles related to hiring and data privacy, without specifying a particular country's laws. The challenge lies in balancing the need for thorough candidate evaluation with the imperative to protect sensitive personal information and avoid discriminatory practices, all while adhering to the spirit and letter of applicable regulations and ethical guidelines. Careful judgment is required to ensure that data collection is necessary, proportionate, and handled with the utmost confidentiality. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes lawful and ethical data handling. By seeking explicit consent for data collection and clearly outlining its purpose, it upholds principles of transparency and individual autonomy, which are foundational to data privacy regulations. This approach minimizes the risk of legal repercussions and reputational damage by demonstrating a commitment to responsible data management. It aligns with the ethical obligation to treat candidates with respect and fairness throughout the hiring process. An incorrect approach that involves collecting extensive personal data without clear justification or consent fails to meet regulatory requirements for data minimization and purpose limitation. This could lead to violations of data protection laws, resulting in fines and legal action. Ethically, it breaches trust with candidates and can be perceived as intrusive and disrespectful. Another incorrect approach that relies on assumptions or generalizations about candidates based on their background information, rather than objective assessment criteria, constitutes discriminatory practice. This not only violates anti-discrimination laws, but also undermines the principle of meritocracy, leading to a less diverse and potentially less effective workforce. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of data needs against legal and ethical obligations. This includes 1. Identifying the specific information required for the assessment and its direct relevance to the job role. 2. Determining if less intrusive methods can achieve the same objective. 3. Obtaining informed consent from candidates, clearly explaining what data is collected, why, and how it will be used and stored. 4. Ensuring robust data security measures are in place. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating data handling policies to remain compliant with evolving regulations and best practices. Question 9. Benchmark analysis indicates that Honda's internal audit team is tasked with evaluating the effectiveness of its risk assessment framework. The team has identified several potential approaches for this evaluation. Which approach would best demonstrate a comprehensive and forward-looking assessment of potential risks to Honda's business operations and reputation? Option A. Reviewing historical incident reports to identify recurring operational failures and assessing the adequacy of current controls for those specific issues. Option B. Conducting interviews with senior management to gather their subjective opinions on the most significant risks facing the company. Option C. Developing a risk register that categorizes potential threats based on their perceived likelihood and potential impact, and then evaluating the effectiveness of existing mitigation strategies against these identified risks. Option D. Analyzing industry, best practices, and regulatory changes to identify potential future risks, and then assessing their potential impact on Honda's strategic objectives and operational resilience. The correct answer is A. Reviewing historical incident reports to identify recurring operational failures and assessing the adequacy of current controls for those specific issues. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of risk assessment beyond simple identification. The challenge lies in distinguishing between a superficial review and a robust, forward-looking assessment that considers the interconnectedness of risks and their potential impact on Honda's operations and reputation. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both compliant with regulatory expectations and strategically sound for the business. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it demonstrates a proactive and integrated understanding of risk management. It moves beyond merely listing potential issues to actively evaluating their likelihood and impact, and crucially, considering the effectiveness of existing controls. This aligns with regulatory expectations that risk assessments should be comprehensive, dynamic, and inform strategic decision-making. Ethically, it upholds the duty of care to stakeholders by ensuring potential threats are adequately understood and mitigated. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on historical data without considering emerging trends or future scenarios fails to meet regulatory requirements for forward-looking risk assessment. It represents a failure to anticipate potential future disruptions and could lead to inadequate preparedness, violating the principle of due diligence. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes only the most obvious or frequently occurring risks, while neglecting less frequent but potentially catastrophic events, demonstrates a lack of comprehensive risk identification. This can lead to significant blind spots and a failure to protect the organization from systemic threats, which is a regulatory and ethical failing. A third incorrect approach that relies on subjective opinions without any attempt at objective measurement or validation of risk likelihood and impact is also professionally unacceptable. This approach lacks the rigor expected in a formal risk assessment process and can lead to misallocation of resources and ineffective risk mitigation strategies, potentially breaching compliance obligations. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve 1. Clearly defining the scope and objectives of the risk assessment. 2. Employing a systematic methodology that includes risk identification, analysis, likelihood and impact, and evaluation. 3. Considering both internal and external factors, including emerging trends and potential future scenarios. 4. Documenting the assessment process and findings thoroughly. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment to reflect changes in the business environment and operational landscape. 6. Communicating findings and recommendations to relevant stakeholders to inform decision-making and resource allocation for risk mitigation. Question 10. The efficiency study reveals that streamlining the customer onboarding process could significantly reduce operational costs. However, the study did not explicitly detail the potential risks associated with these proposed changes, such as increased susceptibility to fraudulent applications or data privacy concerns. Which of the following actions best reflects a responsible approach to integrating these efficiency recommendations? Option A. Delegate the risk assessment to the IT department, assuming they will identify and manage any relevant technical risks without further input. Option B. Immediately implement the efficiency recommendations to realize cost savings and address any emerging risks reactively as they become apparent. Option C. Implement the efficiency recommendations with a minimal, cursory review of potential risks, focusing primarily on the speed of deployment. Option D. Conduct a thorough risk assessment of the proposed onboarding process, changes to identify, analyze, and mitigate potential vulnerabilities before full implementation. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough risk assessment of the proposed onboarding process, changes to identify, analyze, and mitigate potential vulnerabilities before full implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for operational efficiency with the fundamental obligation to conduct thorough risk assessments. The pressure to implement changes quickly, driven by an efficiency study, can lead to overlooking critical risk factors. Careful judgment is required to ensure that proposed improvements do not inadvertently introduce new vulnerabilities or exacerbate existing ones. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and comprehensive risk assessment before implementing changes. This aligns with regulatory expectations for responsible business operation, which mandate proactive identification, evaluation, and mitigation of risks. By integrating risk assessment into the efficiency study's recommendations, the company demonstrates a commitment to a robust risk management framework, ensuring that operational improvements are sustainable and do not compromise the organization's integrity or compliance. This proactive stance is ethically sound, as it protects stakeholders, including customers, employees, and the company itself, from potential harm arising from unaddressed risks. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on implementing the efficiency study's recommendations without a subsequent risk assessment fails to meet regulatory obligations. Such an approach could lead to the introduction of new operational risks, such as data security breaches, process failures, or compliance violations, without adequate controls in place. This demonstrates a disregard for due diligence and a potential violation of principles of sound governance. Another incorrect approach that involves a superficial or rushed risk assessment, perhaps by only considering obvious risks, is also professionally unacceptable. This can result in significant, unforeseen risks being overlooked, leading to potential financial losses, reputational damage, and regulatory penalties. Ethically, this failure to conduct a thorough assessment can be seen as negligence, as it prioritizes speed over safety and security. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the objectives of any proposed change, such as efficiency improvements. This should be immediately followed by a comprehensive risk identification and analysis phase, considering all potential impacts across various operational domains. Subsequently, appropriate mitigation strategies should be developed and implemented. Finally, a continuous monitoring and review process should be established to ensure the effectiveness of controls and to adapt to evolving risk landscapes. This structured approach ensures that efficiency gains are achieved responsibly and sustainably. Question 11. The assessment process reveals that Honda's production targets are at risk due to a confluence of factors. Which of the following approaches to identifying these potential operational risks will be considered the most comprehensive and professionally sound, adhering to best practices in risk management? Option A. Relying primarily on informal discussions with long-serving factory floor employees to gauge their perceptions of potential problems. Option B. Prioritizing risks based solely on their perceived likelihood of occurrence, without considering their potential impact on production targets. Option C. Focusing exclusively on risks that have historically caused production delays in the past 5 years. Option D. Conducting a broad analysis of potential supply chain disruptions, technological advancements that could render current processes obsolete, and geopolitical events that might impact raw material availability. The correct answer is C. Focusing exclusively on risks that have historically caused production delays in the past 5 years. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in risk assessment by requiring the identification of potential operational risks that could impact Honda's ability to meet its production targets. The difficulty lies in moving beyond obvious, direct risks to consider more subtle, interconnected factors that might not be immediately apparent. Effective risk assessment demands foresight, a comprehensive understanding of the business environment, and the ability to anticipate cascading effects. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and forward-looking evaluation of potential disruptions. This aligns with best professional practice in risk management, which emphasizes proactive identification and mitigation. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing operational resilience and business continuity, mandate that organizations identify and assess risks that could impair their ability to deliver services or products. This approach demonstrates a commitment to understanding the full spectrum of potential threats, from supply chain vulnerabilities to technological obsolescence, ensuring that Honda can develop robust contingency plans and maintain its operational integrity. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach focuses solely on immediate known risks. This fails to meet regulatory expectations for comprehensive risk assessment, as it neglects potential future threats and emerging issues. Ethically, It represents a failure to exercise due diligence in protecting the company's interests and stakeholders. Another incorrect approach prioritizes risks with the highest historical frequency, ignoring the potential impact of low-frequency, high-severity events. While historical data is valuable, a robust risk assessment must also consider novel or unprecedented risks that could have catastrophic consequences. This approach can lead to a false sense of security and leave the organization vulnerable to unforeseen disruptions. A third incorrect approach relies heavily on anecdotal evidence and subjective opinions without a structured framework for analysis. While qualitative insights are important, they must be validated and integrated into a more objective risk assessment process. This approach lacks the rigor required by professional standards and regulatory oversight, potentially leading to biased or incomplete risk identification. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured risk assessment methodology that combines qualitative and quantitative techniques. This involves defining the scope of the assessment, identifying potential risks through brainstorming, expert interviews, and data analysis, assessing the likelihood and impact of each risk, and prioritizing risks for mitigation. A continuous monitoring and review process is also crucial to adapt to changing circumstances. This systematic approach ensures that all relevant risks are considered, allowing for the development of effective strategies to protect the organization's objectives. Question 12. System analysis indicates that a new product launch is imminent and a comprehensive risk assessment is required. The team has access to extensive historical data from previous product launches, internal operational reports, and market trend analyses. Which approach to risk assessment would best ensure a thorough and objective evaluation of potential risks for this new product? Option A. A comprehensive review of all available historical data, internal reports, and external market analyses, coupled with brainstorming sessions involving cross-functional teams to identify potential risks and their impacts. Option B. An assessment prioritizing only those risks that have a high potential for catastrophic impact, regardless of their likelihood of occurrence. Option C. A focused review of only the most significant risks encountered during the last 3 product launches, assuming similar challenges will arise. Option D. A risk assessment conducted solely by the product development team, based on their direct experience with the product's technical aspects. The correct answer is A. A comprehensive review of all available historical data, internal reports, and external market analyses, coupled with brainstorming sessions involving cross-functional teams to identify potential risks and their impacts. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient risk identification with the imperative to conduct a thorough and objective assessment. The challenge lies in avoiding confirmation bias and ensuring that the risk assessment process is not unduly influenced by pre-existing assumptions or the desire to quickly move to mitigation. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all potential risks are considered, even those that might seem less probable or less impactful at first glance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it emphasizes a systematic and comprehensive review of all relevant information, including both internal data and external factors. This aligns with regulatory expectations for robust risk management frameworks, which mandate a proactive and evidence-based approach to identifying and evaluating potential threats. By considering a broad range of sources and perspectives, this method ensures that the risk assessment is grounded in reality and is less susceptible to oversight or bias. Ethically, it upholds the principle of due diligence and professional responsibility to act in the best interests of the organization by thoroughly understanding its risk landscape. An incorrect approach that relies solely on historical data without considering emerging trends or new operational changes would be professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet regulatory requirements for forward-looking risk assessments and could lead to a false sense of security. It represents an ethical failure by not adequately protecting the organization from novel or evolving risks. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes only high-impact, low-probability risks while neglecting medium impact, high-probability risks would also be professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a flawed understanding of risk management principles, as it ignores the cumulative effect of more frequent, albeit less severe, events. This oversight could lead to significant operational disruptions and financial losses, failing to uphold the duty of care. A further incorrect approach that focuses exclusively on risks identified by a single department without cross-functional input would be professionally unacceptable. This siloed approach is inherently biased and likely to miss critical risks that span multiple business areas. It violates the ethical principle of transparency and collaboration in risk management. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Define the scope and objectives of the risk assessment clearly. 2. Identify all potential sources of risk, both internal and external. 3. Gather and analyze relevant data from multiple sources. 4. Evaluate the likelihood and impact of identified risks. 5. Prioritize risks based on their potential severity. 6. Document the entire process and the rationale behind decisions. 7. Regularly review and update the risk assessment as circumstances change. This systematic process ensures objectivity, thoroughness, and compliance with regulatory and ethical standards. Question 13. Benchmark analysis indicates that Honda is preparing for new product launch. The risk assessment team has identified several potential risks. Which of the following approaches to prioritizing these risks would best align with robust risk management principles and regulatory expectations for new product introduction? Option A. Rank risks based on the subjective opinions of the most senior executives, as they have the broadest understanding of the company's strategic direction. Option B. Prioritize risks based on a qualitative assessment of their potential impact and likelihood, using a predefined risk matrix to categorize and rank them. Option C. Focus exclusively on risks that have a direct and immediate financial impact, as these are the most critical for business success. Option D. Assign priority solely based on the frequency of similar incidents occurring in the past, assuming historical patterns will repeat. The correct answer is B. Prioritize risks based on a qualitative assessment of their potential impact and likelihood, using a predefined risk matrix to categorize and rank them. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of risk assessment beyond simple identification. The challenge lies in determining the most appropriate method for evaluating the impact and likelihood of identified risks within the context of Honda's operational environment, specifically concerning a new product launch. A superficial approach could lead to misallocation of resources, missed critical threats, or an overestimation of minor issues, all of which can have significant financial and reputational consequences. The need for a forward-looking, adaptable, and compliant approach is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a qualitative risk assessment that prioritizes risks based on their potential impact and likelihood, using a predefined matrix. This method is best professional practice because it aligns with common regulatory expectations for risk management frameworks, which often require a structured and consistent evaluation of risks. For example, within a framework like ISO 31000, though not explicitly stated as the jurisdiction, it represents a widely adopted best practice that aligns with general regulatory principles for risk management. Qualitative assessment provides a practical and efficient way to categorize risks without requiring complex quantitative data that may not be readily available or necessary at the initial stages of a product launch. It allows for clear prioritization, enabling management to focus on the most significant threats and opportunities. This approach is ethically sound as it promotes responsible decision-making by ensuring that potential negative outcomes are considered and addressed proactively. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely focus on the frequency of past similar incidents. This is a failure because it relies on historical data that may not be representative of future events, especially for a novel product. It neglects the potential for new, unforeseen risks or changes in market conditions that could alter the impact or likelihood of existing risks. This approach can be ethically problematic if it leads to underestimating risks that have not occurred frequently in the past, but could have catastrophic consequences. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize risks based on the subjective opinions of the most senior executives without a structured framework. This is a regulatory and ethical failure because it introduces bias and lacks objectivity. It bypasses the systematic evaluation required by sound risk management principles, potentially leading to the overlooking of critical risks that are not immediately apparent to senior leadership or are not aligned with their immediate priorities. This can also create an environment where risks are managed based on personal agendas rather than objective assessment, which is unprofessional and potentially harmful. A further incorrect approach is to only consider risks that have a direct and immediate financial impact. This is a failure because it ignores broader categories of risk, such as reputational damage, regulatory noncompliance, or operational disruptions, which can have significant indirect financial and long-term consequences. A comprehensive risk assessment must consider a wider spectrum of potential impacts, as mandated by many regulatory frameworks that require a holistic view of an organization's risk landscape. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach risk assessment by first understanding the specific context of the situation, e.g., a new product launch for Honda. They should then identify potential risks, followed by a structured evaluation of their likelihood and impact. This evaluation should ideally use a recognized methodology, such as a qualitative risk matrix, to ensure consistency and objectivity. The results should then be used to inform decision-making regarding risk mitigation strategies. Professionals must always consider the relevant regulatory requirements and ethical obligations, ensuring that their risk assessments are thorough, unbiased, and contribute to the overall resilience and success of the organization. Question 14. Cost-benefit analysis shows a significant potential for increased revenue by leveraging customer data for a new service, but this involves processing sensitive information that, if compromised, could lead to substantial regulatory fines and reputational damage. Which of the following represents the most responsible and compliant approach to this situation? Option A. Proceed with the new service immediately to capture the market opportunity, with a plan to address security concerns reactively if any issues arise. Option B. Implement the new service only after conducting a thorough data protection impact assessment, establishing robust security protocols, and ensuring full compliance with all applicable data privacy regulations, even if this delays the revenue generation. Option C. Focus solely on the revenue-generating aspects of the new service, assuming that the likelihood of a data breach is low and the potential benefits outweigh any hypothetical risks. Option D. Implement the new service with the minimum security measures necessary to appear compliant, prioritizing cost savings and faster market entry. Correct answer is B. Implement the new service only after conducting a thorough data protection impact assessment, establishing robust security protocols, and ensuring full compliance with all applicable data privacy regulations, even if this delays the revenue generation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing potential financial gains against the ethical and regulatory obligations to protect customer data. The company has identified a new revenue stream, but its implementation involves a significant risk of data breaches. The challenge lies in making a decision that is not solely driven by profit, but also by a commitment to customer trust and compliance with data protection laws. Careful judgment is required to assess the likelihood and impact of a data breach, and to determine if the potential benefits outweigh the substantial risks and regulatory penalties. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes robust data security measures and a thorough risk assessment before proceeding with the new revenue stream. This aligns with the principles of data protection regulations, which mandate that organizations implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to safeguard personal data. By conducting a comprehensive impact assessment and ensuring compliance with all relevant data privacy laws, the company demonstrates a commitment to responsible data handling and customer welfare. This proactive stance minimizes the likelihood of breaches, reduces potential regulatory fines, and preserves customer trust, which is invaluable for long-term business success. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the potential revenue, without adequately addressing the data security risks, would be professionally unacceptable. This would likely violate data protection regulations by failing to implement adequate safeguards, leading to potential breaches and significant legal and financial repercussions. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing minimal security measures to cut costs, demonstrates a disregard for regulatory requirements and ethical responsibilities. This could result in severe penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer confidence. A third incorrect approach, which involves delaying the implementation of security measures until a breach occurs, is reactive and highly irresponsible. This approach not only exposes the company to immediate and severe risks, but also indicates a fundamental lack of commitment to data protection principles. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the regulatory landscape and ethical considerations. This involves identifying all applicable data protection laws and ethical guidelines. Next, a thorough risk assessment should be conducted, evaluating the potential threats, vulnerabilities, and the impact of a data breach. This assessment should inform the development of mitigation strategies, including the implementation of appropriate security controls and contingency plans. The decision to proceed with any initiative should be based on a clear understanding of the residual risks and the confidence that all regulatory and ethical obligations have been met. Continuous monitoring and review of security measures are also crucial to adapt to evolving threats and regulatory requirements. Question 15. Governance review demonstrates that the firm is considering the adoption of a novel AI-driven trading platform. While the potential for increased efficiency and market insight is significant, the technology operates on principles not fully understood by the current risk management team, and there are no established regulatory guidelines specifically for this type of AI application. Which of the following represents the most prudent and professionally responsible approach to managing the risks associated with this adoption? Option A. Halt all consideration of the AI trading platform due to the lack of established regulatory precedents and the inherent uncertainties associated with novel technology. Option B. Proceed with the full implementation of the AI trading platform immediately to capitalize on its perceived efficiency gains, assuming that any emergent risks can be addressed reactively. Option C. Form a basic risk assessment focusing only on immediate, obvious operational risks, and rely on the vendor's assurances regarding the technology's safety and compliance. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive, multi-stage risk assessment that includes scenario planning for potential AI failures, data integrity issues, and regulatory ambiguity, followed by the development of robust mitigation strategies and a phased implementation plan. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive, multi-stage risk assessment that includes scenario planning for potential AI failures, data integrity issues, and regulatory ambiguity, followed by the development of robust mitigation strategies and a phased implementation plan. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in risk assessment where a new, potentially disruptive technology is being introduced. The professional challenge lies in balancing the potential benefits of innovation with the inherent uncertainties and risks associated with novel systems. A hasty or overly cautious approach could lead to significant financial losses, reputational damage, or missed market opportunities. The need for a robust, yet adaptable risk assessment framework is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured, multi-stage risk assessment that begins with identifying potential risks, analyzing their likelihood and impact, and then developing appropriate mitigation strategies. This aligns with the principles of good governance and risk management expected within regulated financial environments. Specifically, it emphasizes understanding the technology's implications for data security, operational resilience, and compliance with existing regulations before full deployment. This proactive and analytical method ensures that risks are understood and managed, rather than ignored or underestimated, thereby protecting the firm and its clients. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to proceed with full implementation without a thorough risk assessment, relying solely on the perceived benefits of the technology. This demonstrates a failure to adhere to fundamental risk management principles and regulatory expectations for due diligence. It could lead to unforeseen operational failures, data breaches, or noncompliance, resulting in significant financial penalties and reputational harm. Another incorrect approach would be to abandon the technology entirely due to the perceived novelty and lack of established risk models. While caution is necessary, outright rejection without exploration can stifle innovation and lead to a competitive disadvantage. This approach fails to engage in a balanced assessment of risks versus rewards and may not be justifiable under a mandate to explore efficiency improvements. A third incorrect approach would be to conduct a superficial risk assessment that only considers obvious, immediate risks, neglecting potential downstream or systemic impacts. This demonstrates a lack of depth in the analysis and an inadequate understanding of complex interdependencies within the financial system. Such an approach would likely fail to identify critical vulnerabilities, leaving the firm exposed to significant unmitigated risks. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic and iterative approach to risk assessment. This involves 1. Defining the scope and objectives of the assessment. 2. Identifying all potential risks, including those that are novel or indirect. 3. Analyzing the likelihood and impact of each identified risk, using both quantitative and qualitative methods where appropriate. 4. Evaluating the effectiveness of existing controls and developing new mitigation strategies. 5. Documenting the entire process and communicating findings to relevant stakeholders. 6. Establishing a framework for ongoing monitoring and review as risks and the technology itself will evolve. This structured process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with regulatory and ethical obligations. Question 16. The audit findings indicate that the process for collecting candidate assessment data for the Honda hiring assessment test has been inconsistent, with some data being manually transcribed from informal notes rather than directly captured through approved digital platforms. Which approach best addresses this finding while adhering to the principles of data integrity and regulatory compliance? Option A. Implement a mandatory policy requiring all assessment data to be captured directly through the designated digital assessment platform, with a grace period for retraining staff on its proper use. Option B. Advise the hiring managers to verbally confirm the informally noted data with candidates to ensure accuracy before proceeding with any further analysis. Option C. Accept the informally noted data as supplementary information, focusing the audit on the data captured through the digital platform only. Option D. Recommend a review of the informal note-taking process to identify potential improvements in transcription accuracy without mandating a shift to the digital platform. Correct answer is A. Implement a mandatory policy requiring all assessment data to be captured directly through the designated digital assessment platform, with a grace period for retraining staff on its proper use. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient data collection with the imperative to maintain data integrity and comply with regulatory requirements for record keeping. The auditor must exercise careful judgment to ensure that the chosen method of data acquisition does not inadvertently compromise the accuracy or completeness of the information, which could lead to misinterpretations or regulatory breaches. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the use of established, validated, and auditable methods for data extraction. This aligns with the principles of professional skepticism and due diligence, ensuring that the data used for the audit is reliable and can be traced back to its source. Adhering to the Honda hiring assessment tests specific guidelines for data handling and reporting, which implicitly require accuracy and verifiability, is paramount. This method ensures that the audit findings are robust and defensible. An incorrect approach that relies on informal or unverified data sources would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Such an approach undermines the integrity of the audit process, potentially leading to inaccurate conclusions and, consequently, flawed recommendations or decisions. This violates the fundamental ethical obligation to conduct audits with objectivity and competence. Furthermore, it could contravene specific guidelines within the Honda hiring assessment test that mandate the use of approved data collection tools and methodologies, thereby failing to meet the required standards of evidence. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on speed without regard for data validation, would also be professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of due care and professional skepticism. It risks introducing errors or omissions into the audit, which could have serious consequences for the assessment of candidates. Ethically, it fails to uphold the duty of care owed to the assessment process and the integrity of the hiring decisions. Regulatory-wise, it could violate implicit or explicit requirements for thoroughness and accuracy in assessment data. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of available data collection methods against the specific requirements of the assessment, relevant regulatory frameworks, and ethical principles. Professionals should always ask, is this method reliable? Is it auditable? Does it comply with all applicable guidelines? Does it maintain data integrity? Prioritizing methods that offer a verifiable and accurate representation of the information, even if they require slightly more time, is crucial for maintaining professional standards and ensuring the validity of the assessment outcomes. Question 17. Compliance review shows a potential breach of internal data handling policies concerning customer financial information. The compliance officer needs to investigate the extent of the breach and identify responsible parties. What is the most appropriate approach to gathering the necessary information while adhering to data privacy regulations? Option A. Limit data collection to only the most obvious and easily accessible records, prioritizing speed over thoroughness to avoid any potential privacy concerns. Option B. Collect only the specific customer transaction data and associated employee access logs that are directly relevant to the identified policy breach, ensuring all data collected is anonymized where possible and securely stored. Option C. Gather all customer financial records and employee activity logs from the period in question, regardless of direct relevance, to ensure no potential evidence is missed. Option D. Proceed with the investigation by accessing all available customer and employee data without specific regard for data minimization, as the urgency of the compliance breach takes precedence. The correct answer is B. Collect only the specific customer transaction data and associated employee access logs that are directly relevant to the identified policy breach, ensuring all data collected is anonymized where possible and securely stored. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient data collection with the imperative to protect sensitive customer information. The compliance officer must ensure that the data gathering process adheres to data privacy regulations without unduly hindering the investigation's progress. The risk lies in either overcollecting data, leading to privacy breaches and potential regulatory fines, or undercollecting data, which could compromise the effectiveness of the compliance review. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing data minimization and purpose limitation, core principles of data privacy regulations. By focusing on collecting only the data directly relevant to the identified compliance issue, the officer adheres to the principle of necessity. This approach minimizes the risk of unauthorized access, disclosure of irrelevant personal data, thereby upholding customer trust and regulatory compliance. It also ensures that the investigation is targeted and efficient, avoiding the burden of processing and storing unnecessary information. This aligns with the spirit and letter of data protection laws that mandate responsible data handling. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves collecting all available customer data without a clear justification for each data point. This violates the principle of data minimization and purpose limitation. It creates an unnecessary risk of data breaches, increases storage and processing costs, and could lead to regulatory penalties for non-compliance with data protection laws. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of respect for customer privacy. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the data privacy implications entirely and proceed with an unfettered data collection, assuming that the investigation's needs supersede all privacy concerns. This is a direct contravention of regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. It exposes the organization to significant legal liabilities, reputational damage, and loss of customer confidence. Such an approach shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the legal and ethical framework governing data handling. A third incorrect approach is to overrestrict data collection to the point where the investigation is severely hampered and cannot effectively identify the root cause of the compliance issue. While privacy is paramount, the purpose of the investigation must also be met. This approach fails to strike the necessary balance, potentially leading to a flawed review and continued noncompliance, which itself can have serious regulatory consequences. It suggests an inability to apply judgment in a nuanced situation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first clearly defining the scope and objectives of the compliance review. They must then identify the specific data points absolutely necessary to achieve those objectives, always with data privacy principles in mind. This involves a risk-based assessment, considering what data is essential versus what is merely convenient. Documentation of the rationale for data collection is crucial. If in doubt, consulting with legal or data privacy experts is a prudent step. The decision-making process should be guided by a commitment to both regulatory adherence and ethical conduct, ensuring that the organization's operations are both compliant and trustworthy. Question 18. Process analysis reveals that a newly onboarded employee, tasked with data entry for vehicle service records, has expressed frustration with the multi-step verification process, suggesting a direct upload to the central database to save time. This process is in place to ensure data accuracy and prevent fraudulent entries, aligning with internal audit requirements and data integrity standards. What is the most appropriate professional response to this situation? Option A. Acknowledge the employee's desire for efficiency and permit them to implement their suggested direct upload method, provided they can complete their tasks within the original time frame. Option B. Allow the new employee to bypass the verification steps for a trial period to assess the impact on efficiency, with the understanding that they will be solely responsible for any errors that occur. Option C. Advise the new employee that while efficiency is valued, adherence to the established multi-step verification process is mandatory and no deviations are permitted, without further explanation. Option D. Schedule a dedicated session with the new employee to explain the critical importance of each step in the data verification process, detailing how it safeguards against errors and ensures compliance with data integrity protocols, while also inviting their input on potential process improvements through the designated feedback channels. The correct answer is D. Schedule a dedicated session with the new employee to explain the critical importance of each step in the data verification process, detailing how it safeguards against errors and ensures compliance with data integrity protocols, while also inviting their input on potential process improvements through the designated feedback channels. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing efficiency with the integrity of internal processes. A new hire, eager to contribute, might bypass established procedures to expedite a task, potentially leading to errors, data inconsistencies, or even regulatory breaches if the process involves sensitive information or compliance checks. The professional challenge lies in guiding the new hire towards understanding the importance of adherence to established protocols, even when they seem cumbersome, without stifling their initiative. This requires a nuanced approach that educates rather than simply reprimands. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured onboarding and training process that clearly articulates the rationale behind each procedural step. This includes explaining how adherence to these processes ensures data accuracy, compliance with relevant regulations, e.g., data protection laws, financial reporting standards, or industry-specific guidelines applicable to Honda's operations in its primary markets, and maintains the overall integrity of Honda's operational framework. Emphasizing the why behind each step, rather than just the how, fosters a deeper understanding and commitment to best practices. This aligns with principles of good corporate governance and risk management, ensuring that all employees understand their role in maintaining compliance and operational excellence. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to dismiss the new hire's concerns about process efficiency without explanation. This can lead to resentment, a perception of a rigid and unsupportive work environment, and may encourage the new hire to continue seeking shortcuts, potentially leading to more significant issues. It fails to address the underlying desire for efficiency and misses an opportunity for constructive feedback and process improvement. Another incorrect approach is to allow the new hire to deviate from established procedures without proper oversight or a formal process for evaluating proposed changes. This undermines the established control environment and could introduce risks that have not been adequately assessed. It also sets a precedent that established procedures can be ignored, which is detrimental to long-term operational stability and compliance. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on the immediate task completion, overlooking the procedural adherence. While task completion is important, neglecting the process can lead to systemic issues that are harder to rectify later. This approach prioritizes short-term output over long-term operational health and compliance, which is a significant regulatory and ethical failing. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the root cause of a deviation or concern. This involves active listening to the employee's perspective, clearly communicating the importance of established procedures and their regulatory underpinnings, and providing constructive feedback. If an employee identifies a genuine inefficiency, a professional approach involves guiding them through the proper channels for suggesting process improvements, ensuring that any changes are vetted for compliance and operational impact before implementation. This fosters a culture of continuous improvement while maintaining robust control and compliance. Question 19. The evaluation methodology shows that the new ethical conduct training program for Honda employees has achieved a 98% completion rate, and received overwhelmingly positive participant feedback regarding the clarity of the material. However, there is no data collected on whether employees are applying the learned principles in their day-to-day decision-making, or if there has been any observable change in ethical behavior within teams. Which of the following approaches best evaluates the true effectiveness of this training program in fostering a culture of compliance and mitigating potential ethical risks? Option A. Supplementing the existing data with post-training scenario-based assessments and qualitative interviews with a sample of employees and their managers to gauge the practical application of ethical principles and identify any shifts in decision-making. Option B. Focusing solely on the positive feedback to identify areas for improving the training delivery and content, assuming that satisfied employees are inherently more compliant. Option C. Relying on the absence of any new ethics-related complaints filed since the training's rollout as definitive proof that the program has successfully prevented misconduct. Option D. Concluding that the training is highly effective due to the high completion rate and positive feedback, as this indicates strong employee engagement and satisfaction with the program's content. The correct answer is A. Supplementing the existing data with post-training scenario-based assessments and qualitative interviews with a sample of employees and their managers to gauge the practical application of ethical principles and identify any shifts in decision-making. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in assessing the effectiveness of a new internal training program designed to enhance compliance with Honda's ethical conduct policies. The difficulty lies in moving beyond simple completion metrics to truly gauge behavioral change and its impact on risk mitigation. A purely quantitative approach might show high engagement but fail to capture whether employees are internalizing and applying the principles in their daily work, especially in nuanced situations where ethical judgment is required. This requires a qualitative and behavioral assessment alongside quantitative data. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a multifaceted evaluation that combines quantitative data on training completion and knowledge retention with qualitative assessments of behavioral application. This approach aligns with the principles of robust compliance programs, which emphasize not just awareness, but also the embedding of ethical conduct into organizational culture and decision-making. Regulatory frameworks often require demonstrable efforts to prevent and detect misconduct, which necessitates evaluating the practical impact of training, not just its delivery. This approach provides a more holistic and accurate picture of the program's effectiveness in fostering a compliant workforce and mitigating risks, aligning with the spirit of regulatory expectations for due diligence and ethical oversight. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on the number of employees who completed the training without assessing comprehension or application is a superficial evaluation. This approach fails to demonstrate that the training has had any meaningful impact on employee behavior or understanding, potentially leaving the organization exposed to compliance risks if employees are not truly adhering to policies. It neglects the regulatory expectation of ensuring employees are not only aware of, but also capable of acting in accordance with ethical standards. Evaluating the program's success based on the absence of reported policy violations, since its implementation is also flawed. This approach assumes a direct causal link between the training and the lack of violations, ignoring other contributing factors or the possibility that violations are simply going unreported. It does not proactively assess the effectiveness of the training in preventing potential issues or equipping employees to handle ethical dilemmas, which is a key component of a proactive compliance strategy. Measuring success by the positive feedback received from participants, while useful for identifying areas of improvement in delivery, does not confirm actual behavioral change or improved compliance outcomes. Positive feedback can be influenced by factors unrelated to the program's effectiveness in fostering ethical conduct, such as the trainer's charisma or the convenience of the training schedule. This approach lacks the rigor needed to demonstrate a tangible impact on risk reduction and adherence to ethical standards. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a balanced scorecard approach to evaluating compliance training. This involves defining clear, measurable objectives that go beyond mere participation. Key performance indicators should include not only completion rates, but also post-training assessments of knowledge, scenario-based evaluations of ethical decision-making, and where feasible, observations of behavioral changes in the workplace. Regular feedback loops, including anonymous reporting channels and periodic employee surveys on ethical climate, can provide further insights. This comprehensive approach ensures that training investments are demonstrably contributing to a culture of integrity and effective risk management, satisfying both internal governance and external regulatory expectations. Question 20. Operational review demonstrates a recurring anomaly in a customer data processing module that occasionally generates incomplete transaction records. While the anomaly is intermittent and doesn't appear to be causing immediate financial loss, it raises concerns about data integrity and potential compliance gaps. Option A. Continue to monitor the anomaly without taking immediate corrective action, assuming it is a minor, infrequent issue that will likely resolve itself. Option B. Delete the incomplete transaction records to prevent any potential downstream issues and focus on patching the module without further investigation. Option C. Share the raw system logs containing customer transaction data with an external IT consultant for an immediate broad-based diagnosis. Option D. Immediately isolate the affected module for in-depth forensic analysis. Document all findings and remediation steps, and escalate to the compliance team for guidance on reporting obligations. The correct answer is D. Immediately isolate the affected module for in-depth forensic analysis, document all findings and remediation steps, and escalate to the compliance team for guidance on reporting obligations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between maintaining operational efficiency and adhering to stringent regulatory requirements for data handling and customer privacy. The need to quickly address a system anomaly while ensuring no customer data is compromised or misused requires a nuanced approach that balances speed with compliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes immediate containment and investigation of the anomaly without compromising customer data, aligning with the principles of data protection and regulatory compliance. This involves isolating the affected system, conducting a thorough internal review, and documenting all actions taken. This proactive and compliant stance minimizes the risk of regulatory breaches, reputational damage, and potential penalties. It demonstrates a commitment to customer trust and adherence to the spirit and letter of data privacy laws. An incorrect approach that involves immediately deleting the affected data without proper investigation or documentation would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action would prevent any potential forensic analysis, hinder compliance reporting, and could be interpreted as an attempt to conceal a problem, violating principles of transparency and accountability. Another incorrect approach, such as sharing the raw system logs with external parties without a clear need-to-know or proper data anonymization, would violate data privacy regulations and could expose sensitive customer information, leading to severe legal and ethical repercussions. A third incorrect approach, which is to ignore the anomaly hoping it resolves itself, is a failure of due diligence and risk management, potentially leading to a more severe breach or noncompliance with ongoing monitoring requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core issue and its potential impact. This is followed by assessing the relevant regulatory obligations and ethical considerations. Next, they should evaluate potential courses of action against these requirements, prioritizing those that are compliant, transparent, and minimize risk. Finally, they should document their chosen course of action and the rationale behind it, ensuring accountability and facilitating future review.